the Rise Up See Red podcast, all about the Arizona Cardinals and the NFL, featuring insider and outsider perspectives. Enjoy the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Now here are your hosts, Jess Root and Seth Cox.
Hello, Arizona Cardinals fans, and welcome to the latest edition of the Rise Up See Red podcast, the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. I'm your host, Jess Root from CardsWire.com, the USA Today NFL Wire site, covering your Arizona Cardinals, and with me is my co-host, Seth Cox from RevengeOfTheBirds.com, SB Nation's Arizona Cardinals site, and one of the hosts of the original Draft Breakdown podcast. We're at episode 476, and this is our Seahawks review game. This is reviewing the Seahawks game, although, you know, we do have to give a shout-out to the Arizona Diamondbacks. We're recording on a Tuesday night. Being Arizona natives, Arizona sports fans for our entire life, this is a cool moment. This is something that we wish in the time that we've covered the Cardinals professionally, man, it'd be nice to have an experience like this. But the Diamondbacks are going to the World Series, so I'm going to give a shout-out to them. And those that cover the team, because I did that once upon a time. It was back in 2011 and 2012. I did get to cover the team for SB Nation at the time, and that was a different time for sure.
Yeah, and that's when they were awful, right? Like that's when they were.
It was, and actually it was because the 2011 year they did go to the playoffs, and then 2012 they were supposed to be good and fell apart, which has been since their world championship. That's been their MO. They usually, so when you go to 07, 2011, 2017, every time that they make the postseason, it's a surprise. They're basically a year ahead of schedule, and then the next year, it just doesn't work out. It just doesn't work out. Like 2012 then they had that run, and then they go out and get Dan Herron, and the beginning of the year they were gangbusters, and they just absolutely fell apart after that. But this isn't a baseball show, guys. This isn't a baseball show. I'll have you guys know, baseball was my first love before football. But things have changed. Still love baseball, but football is what it is. And the Cardinals, and I guess it's probably a little bit easier to talk about the Diamondbacks because the Cardinals they're bad. They're bad.
Yeah, and I mean, not surprisingly, though. I mean, we expected them to struggle, and then as injuries hit, it was like, oh, I don't know what this team is or what they're going to be able to do. And then, I mean, this week, and it's something that we're going to talk about, you have to, I mean, you look at it and you go, okay, maybe they're coming around somewhat at some spots, but, you know, it's a lot of it is just, we knew they were razor thin from a talent perspective, and now they are at the point where you're just like, the injuries are killing this team, and there's another one. I mean, there is another one.
There is, absolutely. We're going to talk. So the Cardinals lose to the Seattle Seahawks in Week 7, 20-10. We will talk about how the defense was actually pretty good. The defense did its job, and unlike previous weeks, the defense did not fall apart in the second half. The offense was anemic throughout. They went scoreless in the second half again, so we're going to talk about the offense, we're going to talk about the defense, and roster moves and injuries. It's kind of a normal thing, and we will have this week, in terms of programming, we will have a 3-show week. Seth and I will talk about the Cardinals-Ravens coming up later this week, and then I will have a guest interview with, what catch his name? Also, so it's not from one of my network. It was reached out by I did Solomon Wilcott's for the Bengals game, and I've got lined up, it is Daniel Wilcox. how that goes. Daniel Wilcox, who is a former NFL tight end. He hosts the Believe in Ravens podcast, and he was an NFL champion a long time ago, back in Super Bowl 37. I'm not, Seth might have been a kid then.
Yeah, I mean, it's been a while, right?
Yes, it has. So let's start with the defense, because the question that I posed, Seth, for this show is, obviously the defense has played better, and I think the first thing we have to recognize is that they got Budda Baker back, and that makes a difference. Now, going back to the Rams game, they were missing both Budda Baker and Jalen Thompson. And Thompson did not play, but having Budda Baker back on that defense, I think, made a difference. But the question is, with the play of the defense, was it more of what the Cardinals did and perhaps Baker's return, or was it more about the Seahawks just having a rather meh offense? Because they weren't impressive, and in part, they did not have DK Metcalf. That changed things, but Jackson Smith and Jigba did get used more. Tyler Lockett did not, some of our props didn't work out because...
Shocking. I mean, it was the way, we knew, and if you listen beforehand, I spoon-fed you the Kenneth Walker over 100 yards. I mean, that was the big one.
That was inevitable.
But, yeah, and the crazy thing is, this is again what we talked about beforehand. The crazy thing with that team is they just don't get big plays. Now, Jake Bobo had the 31-yard catch. That was just
I still don't think it was a touchdown.
Jackson Smith and Jigba had the 28-yard touchdown. That was a broken coverage. Well, I'm not sure if Gannon went over what happened on that play. But those were all pass plays. But you look at it, Kenneth Walker, 105 yards rushing. His long was 6 yards.
that is like the 2006 and 2007 Edger and James years.
Right. He just, it was plotting. And that's the thing is they did a little bit better. They gave a little more oomph, right? To the Seahawks and we talked a little bit about it. Geno's just not the same guy, right? Like he's still protecting the ball. He had the one bad interception, 18-24, so his completion percentage is good, but there's just not big plays. And it's crazy to see it. But at the same time, we kind of were like, oh, this is a get well game for Seattle, right? And that didn't happen. And this was probably, I think you would probably agree, this is probably the best performance from the defense we've seen since the Dallas game.
Yeah. And yes, absolutely, especially in the second half, because, the numbers are still bad. The Cardinals are now minus 74-point differential in the second half with now 104-30. They were held scoreless, and we're going to talk about the offense, but they held Seattle to 2 field goals in the second half. And were it not for that touchdown pass to Jake Bobo, this is a very different game. And I'll be honest, I still don't think that was a touchdown. I don't know how they overturned that call in the end zone, based on the angles that we could see, because the officials literally right on top of that. I don't know how. I'm sure that the booth that New York has other camera angles that we didn't have available to the fans on TV, but if it didn't, I don't know how. I have no idea how they overturned that.
Yeah, and a lot of it just comes down to there are times when there's some home cooking. We saw it in the ASU UW game on a terrible flag that was thrown and then magically picked up. Where you're like,
the Pac-12 called into the refs, say, that we have to have Washington win, right?
Right. And so that, I mean, it happens. I mean, there are missed calls or bad calls or bad, situations every game. And it's not an excuse for the loss. What it is it's a reality of that they're just not good enough to overcome it. Right.
No.
Like they can't, they're not good enough as is probably, but at the same time, they they just can't overcome those things, and that was a huge deal. And you look at it, you look at some of the things, the offense, this was probably their second worst game of the season. Again, we kind of throw out that first game. We just don't even really look at it, right? Like, I
It
don't know
was
what
bad.
anybody,
It was bad by both teams. Let's be honest. Commanders were bad. The Cardinals were bad.
but
Um,
but this is probably their second worst game of the season offensively after the Rams game. And you go, okay, well, that's back-to-back weeks. And again, Seattle's run defense is great. I mean, great.
and
And they
well,
put
and
up
that's the thing.
127 rushing yards.
Yes, yes, and that's the thing. And we'll talk about the offense, but there were things defensively that they did better. Like they hadn't gotten their hand on a pass in 2 weeks, they had gotten their hand on one pass in 3 weeks, and they had three pass breakups.
And they hadn't won the turnover battle
Correct.
since,
Right.
since the
That
Dallas
that
Cowboys
is the
game.
one thing that's absolutely absurd, that you can get three takeaways, not turn the ball over yourself and lose by 10. That's absurd. But that's when we talk about the offense.
But you even look at it. I mean, you're right that's absurd. But you look at the aspects of it. The defense didn't do poorly in a lot of ways. I mean, obviously, you look at a couple things, right? The first one being that broken coverage.
Yeah. They gave up big plays
to Jackson Smith and Jigba that got Seattle on the board 7-0. Because before that, I mean, they had gotten a stop, which we hadn't seen in a while. Zaven made a great play on a sack, got him in 3rd and 15. We were able to get a stop. Then they come back and they just get, like you said, beat up. I mean, 2 plays, 53 yards. That was probably their worst drive of the game, because it was only 3 plays total. So 3 plays, 61 yards and a touchdown. Like, that's just not acceptable. Like, you can't do that if you're gonna potentially win a game. The rest of the scoring drives, I mean, you look at it, it was again Cardinals with the lead in the second quarter, 10-7. They had a couple chances to get off the field. Obviously, they had them 3rd and 10, and they complete a pass to Tyler Lockett for 15 yards. They get them in 3rd and 5, and they complete a pass to Tyler Lockett for 8 yards. And then that kind of pseudo Hail Mary to Bobo in the corner of the end zone. And then they come out again, and it's 14-10 at the half, and the Cardinals kick off, and you're like, okay, they're in a decent spot, and 3rd and 2, Gino with the scramble. 2nd and 11, a deep pass to tight end. 2nd and 7, and then 3rd and 5, they allowed Gino to scramble twice in a row. Those are the things that killed them, and then they force a field goal. So it's 17-10. They have a shot, and from there, that again, the defense didn't do a bad job. I mean, still lacking in 3 and outs, but again, that's a talent issue. They got the pick, or they got the fumble recovery, set up the offense in positive field position. They get the 3 and out in the start of the 4th quarter. So this is the big thing that the defense did that they haven't done all season. They get the 4th quarter, they punt, or the Cardinals punt 58 yards, good punt. They're at the 17. The second play is the Geno Smith fumble. and they recover it. Then the next series, even though they don't convert, the next series, they could have folded. I mean, and quite frankly, they have folded, right? Most of the time.
Yes.
Like, and they come out, they get a sack of Geno Smith, put him in 3rd and 12 and make a play. Like you said, Starling Thomas gets his hand on the ball, makes a pass breakup. They even got a holding call on that in case they did complete it. So like, it was like, all right. And so that was, again, that's what you need from your defense in situations like that. So I think you look at those as huge positives in what we haven't seen. I mean, until they got the ball back with under 5 minutes to go in the fourth quarter, the Seahawks, including a punt, ran 6 plays. 6 plays. I mean, you literally cannot ask more from
no, you really can't. You really can't. And there were some, they only held them to 318 yards. 3rd down, 7 of 13. That's not great. But they,
now you want to be below 40% at least. But again, certain 3rd downs, they did a nice job. And again, that comes back to just a team that, and I know we're going to get to this, but like, you can't give up 6 plays, not 6 points, 6 plays in the fourth quarter and score as much as you and I did in the game. Like, that just can't happen.
Yeah.
Especially when you look at it, they were on the plus side on their recovery. And then they were on their own 33 coming out the next series. So like, it's not like they were ever pinned deep again or anything like that. Like, both series started in good to great territory, and they got 0 points out of it. So I don't want to make an excuse for the field goal, the 48. And by the way, you look at it, Seattle took over on their own 49 and got to the 30. Like, they still held them to about 20 yards.
Yeah.
They just, again, it comes down to, can you make plays? And this season, this was the first time defensively, I think we could say that they rose to the occasion since the Dallas game, right?
Yeah. And I think, honestly, Budda Baker's presence was like, it didn't feel like he had a big impactful game, but I think his presence on the defense does change things. And obviously the absence of Tyler Lockett and being down their starting center, that affects things as well. But they helped. So Seattle scored 1 touchdown in 3 red zone trips. They had that goal to go, the goal to goal stand that led to that 21-yard field goal. It was, they had some very good moments. Kevin Strong picked up a half sack, so he's had at least a partial sack now in 3 consecutive games, which is really nice, especially considering having lost L.J. Collier and Carlos Watkins. To see that sort of production from the defensive interior has been very nice to see. Strong had 5 total tackles. Ledbetter had 4 tackles and a half sack.
Well, and I think this was Zaven Collins' best game of the year too.
Yeah.
Like, he actually didn't just, I mean, I know the sack was kind of whatever, but he actually played a very strong game overall. Not just as a pass rusher, but on the run defense, did a good job tackling. And then he did have additional hurries in the game. So like, this was a game that we had kind of been waiting to see if he could do it. I know Seattle was without their starting offensive tackle, right? Like the kid that's supposed to be really good.
Abe Lucas, yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, they didn't have their.
No, and that was Jake Curran is a concern. Charles Cross is solid. Jake Curran's not that great.
But he did line up against Cross a lot of the game.
Yeah.
So so overall, I think you have to look at it as really a net positive overall for the defensive effort in this game. After, I don't think we've said that again since Dallas. I mean, we haven't talked positively about the defense. I mean, we've talked maybe about individuals.
Yeah,
but
that's
we
true.
haven't talked about the defense as a whole.
Marco again was
positive.
he was not noticeably bad. Starling Thomas looked really good.
Was a revelation.
and then Garrett Williams in his NFL debut. Now the interception that he had, that wasn't a great throw, but the fact that he made that play was nice. Let's just look at it. The slot and the opposing receivers had just been absolutely cooking the Cardinals. Tyler Lockett had 4 catches for 38 yards. That was it.
Yeah, you and I both agreed. So like, this isn't a shot for either of us. You and I both agreed that he was going to put up numbers.
Right. Well, their 2 top slot guys in Jalen Thompson and Antonio Hamilton are out. We didn't know who was going to play in the slot. Good thing, looks like Garrett Williams, their 3rd-round rookie, is not a bad choice, at least for now. We'll talk more about the matchups coming up, but yeah, Baker's presence was good. We'll talk about some of the rotation, but Starling Thomas looked good, and Jeff Risdon over at Lions Wire, that they really liked Thomas as a potential guy for special teams, but felt that he was too handsy playing in coverage. And Thomas did really, I mean, 1, he was physical. 2, don't you think that he's the guy that probably is the reason why they let Christian Matthew go, because he's a younger, more talented version of him?
Yeah, and I think, we always talk about it, those 7th-round rookies, that you give them shots and you hope that they work out, but most of the time they don't. I mean, they just don't. And so a 3rd-round rookie that probably was an early day 2 pick, maybe even a back end around 1 pick, if he's healthy, steal's a strong word, because it's just tough.
It's week 7 before he even gets on the field, so
right, and it's just like, how many teams can afford to take that swing in the 3rd round? Like, you're either going to be a really good team that's looking at him as a 2024 guy, or a really bad team with the same vision, right? That you're like, hey, we know we're going to suck, so when he plays, this year doesn't matter. So, I mean, there's not a lot of teams that get to take that chance. But game 1, obviously, with a huge caveat that it's 1 game, you had to be excited about those early returns.
Yeah, totally. Coming up next on the Rise Up See Red podcast, best of Cardinals talk on the web. Let's kind of move forward and move on to the offensive side of the ball, where they've had an offensive performance. Ha 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 ha! Jokes there. Coming up next on Rise Up See Red. We're back on the Rise Up See Red podcast, best of Cardinals talk on the web. The offense, oh my gosh, 249 total yards, and 100. They had more net rushing yards than they had passing yards. That is how bad that was. And they didn't have a great rushing performance. It was simply a couple of plays. I think the bright spot, and I think this might be the only reason why Josh Dobbs continues to have the job that he does starting, is because, 1, he handles himself well. So like leadership, poise, and stuff like that. He does make timely plays with his legs. And that is, I think, saving his job right now. But his play as a passer has been markedly underwhelming the last 3 weeks. He had a 3-week run. Week 1 was bad. Weeks 2 through 4, he had a passer rating of 99.9 or higher in those 3 games. he hit his 68.5 passer rating on Sunday was the highest that he had previously. He didn't even crack 60 the previous 2 weeks and didn't crack 70, which, while the passer rating is not the end-all be-all, it is a good indication of your effectiveness as a passer. Geno Smith got picked off, but he had 219 yards on 24 passing attempts. Passer were 2 touchdown passes, and it was a passer rate of 113. Opposing quarterbacks have been cooking the Cardinals, just absolutely cooking them. I think they've given up a passer rating of 104 or higher in 3 consecutive games, I believe it is. So yeah, it's been a struggle. It's been a struggle. It might be 4 straight games too. I think it's Purdy. Yeah. I think Purdy, Burrow, Stafford. Yeah, and so it's 4 straight that they gave up. That they had an opposing quarterback have a passer rating of 104 or 105 or higher.
Well, and you look at it, it's one of those situations where you and I have discussed from the beginning. This was, who Josh Dobbs is, and he had a 3-game stretch where he played.
That was a ceiling. It was a ceiling.
Well, and just better than he's ever played before. I mean, he completed in those 3 games, he completed
70% of his passes.
Yeah. And he didn't throw an interception. He threw 4 touchdowns. I mean, it was the best stretch of his career. I'm not one of those guys that's like, take those 3 games out. What do you get? But you look at it in the other 4 games, he has 2 touchdowns, 3 interceptions, and he's completing below
it's about 50%. It's about 57% of his passes.
Yeah,
and he's been sacked 9 times in his last. He was only sacked 3 times total in that 3-game stretch where he was playing well. He's been sacked 9 times in the last 3.
Right, and you look at it, and there's one thing that I always talk about, and it's their AYA, right? Adjusted yards gain per pass attempt. And we can debate a lot of things on this, but he's played in what now, 7 games. He has 1 game where he's below 4, which is awful. You typically want to be above, like 6 and above with that number, and typically you want to be up around 8. But he has 1 game where he's below 4, which is literally one of the worst games ever.
That's worse than a bad running game.
Right. And then he's got 3 games where he's below 5. That's this season. In Kyler Murray's career, which is how many games? Quite a few. I mean, I don't know off the top of my head how many, but Kyler Murray in his career has 7 in 57 games, like 7 below 5. And so that's kind of when the chatter kind of started after what game was it? Was it after the Dallas game, or was it really after that San Francisco game where he didn't play poorly and everybody was kind of like, well, and you're just kind of like, no, I don't know what. Like he threw 2 touchdowns against a Dallas team that, I mean, let's be honest, hasn't looked great the last 2 weeks. Kirk Cousins is, I mean, people crap on Kirk Cousins all the time. I think he's a better quarterback than he's given credit for, but also lost to PJ Walker. I mean, it's not like we're talking about prime Deshaun Watson over on Cleveland sideline winning that game. And so you look at it, it's interesting that as he's gone after that San Francisco game, which was his peak, he's really regressed against teams that had struggled defensively, especially defending the pass. I mean, Cincinnati, the Rams, and Seattle, none of those teams you're going to be like, oh, that's just a great pass defense. They have phenomenal. I mean, they have great individual players, but they're all they're all right around average, league average in terms of pass defense, and don't do a great job. None of them are. I mean, they're okay rushing the passer. We talked about Seattle. They were a little better than Arizona rushing the passer. I don't think anybody would say that Arizona's, pass rush is great by any means. And so to see the regression against, when you saw what happened against San Francisco, it's just interesting that the falling back to earth or regressing to the mean or whatever you want to call it happened in those games, because in the end you look at it and maybe San Francisco's pass defense isn't as good as everybody expected it to be, but also maybe that game or those 3 games were more the outlier, and now we're back to kind of who Josh Dobbs is, unfortunately. And again, it's not a shot at Dobbs.
Well, and I think we can point to something very specific: losing James Conner.
Yeah, I mean, 100%.
You have James Conner in the lineup to be the main guy. I think that changes everything. And Dobbs playing with a healthy Conner was after week 1 was so efficient, and is a different and they've been able to run the ball in terms of volume, in terms of actual yards, but in terms of impact, they haven't had any of their running backs have any sort of impact running. Amari DeMarcado played fine.
He's been great for an undrafted
13 carries for 58 yards. He had an 18-yarder. He also had 4 catches for 17 yards. So 75 total yards. But it's different than, his 58 yards is different than James Conner's 58 yards, if that makes any sort of sense, because James Conner, the way he plays, actually puts fear in. It's not like Derrick Henry fear. It's not like Nick Chubb fear. But it does put just a little bit of fear in opposing defenses, because he will run over you, and 2, he can run past you. He's not a speedster, but we've seen several long runs that he's ripped off this year. He's not Rondell Moore to be able to rip the 40-plus yards, but he can move and he can make impact big plays. And losing him, I think defenses, it'd be first and foremost, they don't have to focus as much on the run game, which means they're saying, okay, Josh Dobbs.
Yeah, beat us, Dobbs.
Beat us. And even though Hollywood Brown has been cooking, guess what? Dobbs can't hit him.
No, and it comes back to, I think you and I would both agree with this statement. It's kind of shocking how well, if you would have told me that Josh Dobbs is running for, what is it, about 30 yards per game right now, a little over 30 yards per game. And he didn't really start doing it until the Dallas game, right?
Yeah.
And so realistically, the last 5 games, he's averaging right around 50 yards per game. So if you would have told me that Dobbs is averaging almost 6 yards a carry, rushing for about 50 yards per game, and not turning the ball over, I would have been like, oh, so this defense isn't bad. But or this offense isn't bad, right? They're fine. But the reality is his performance passing has become, I mean, it's like having a super watered down version of Justin Fields, right? Where you're running for 50 yards a game instead of 120 yards a game, but you still can't throw the ball. And so it's frustrating. And I guess I was not expecting that regression to hit so hard after the San Francisco game. Like
Yeah.
I just didn't see it coming. And it really, and like you said, it makes sense because they don't have James Conner. So now this offense is basically on Josh Dobbs. But I mean, that performance in Seattle is probably the worst performance I can remember from a quarterback that didn't like have a turnover in the game. Like
Yeah,
it was just
146 yards on 33 passing attempts, and that was after there were a couple of longer passes. I think you tweeted out when he had 106 yards on like 26 passing attempts.
yeah, I'll confirm that real quick. But yeah, it's like
Awful.
it was bad. 106 yards on 29.
Oh my gosh.
And so like that's not even adjusted yards per attempt. That's just yards per attempt was 3.6. That's
atrocious.
And so it just makes it really, really hard to do anything offensively. And it's surprising, I guess, is the best way to put it, to see a guy that put up that 3-game stretch where, nobody was like, well, I shouldn't say that.
There were fans. Yeah. They're like, trade Kyler Murray. Dobbs the starter. No.
But I think even you and I were like, this is a guy that you can have as a long-term backup in this situation. And people were responding with like, well, the way he's playing, he's probably going to be a starter in the NFL. And it's like, now you're seeing why that's not plausible. I mean, it's just not possible for him to be a starter in the NFL because he's just not good enough. Like, you can't have a 3-game stretch like this. You just can't. I mean,
no,
it's
okay.
Utterly...
In fairness, we've seen quarterbacks do that, and how many of them were starters anywhere else? Josh Rosen, right. Ryan Lindley, Max Hall.
There's a lot of Cardinals quarterbacks you're talking about.
Yeah. Yes. We are we are used to seeing bad quarterback play. We're used to it, but yeah, but is it the answer to move to Clayton Tune? I don't think so, because
not if he's going to throw for 4 yards on a fourth and.
Oh my God, that was I do not understand what that was, because Seattle. I mean, I get doing a fake punt. I get doing that. But if your fake has the backup quarterback in the game, guess what? Seattle wasn't fooled at all, and I know they tried to hide Tune in a way in the huddle. Guess what? NFL teams aren't dumb. It's one thing like when you have Andy Lee throw a pass. He's the punter. You don't expect that. You send your rookie backup quarterback who's never played an NFL snap in half a season. You think you're going to sneak him in there and convert on that 4th down play when they had all the receivers covered? And I personally don't listen a ton to the TV broadcast, but that one made so much sense. And this was a Gannon call. I'm like, that's when you call timeout and say, well, you got us, and just punt the stupid ball away. That was absurd. That I've never seen the Cardinals run such an absurd special teams fake ever.
Yeah, it was bad, and so, but wasn't it kind of like the perfect cherry on top?
Yes,
because you look at it and you go. Oh, it makes sense to run a 4-yard, or that you would have a 4-yard completion on a 4th and 11 play.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Yes. It's just, Hollywood had 3 for, like, no one had more than 4 catches. No one reached 50 passing yards. The highlight offensive, you could say that Amari DeMercado played well. and then Josh Dobbs ran the ball well. And after that,
I think the highlight of the game was the Trey McBride catch and run where
the hurdle.
Yeah, where he hurdle somebody, and you're like, oh, he can be athletic and good. And then, obviously now he's going to get an even bigger role to do that.
Yeah. Coming up next on the Rise Up C Red podcast, Mr. of Cardinals Talk the Web. We've got some interesting stuff that we're going to talk about with roster moves, benchings, and more. That's coming up next on Rise Up C Red. We're back on the Rise Up C Red podcast, the best hour of Cardinals Talk on the Web. Time to talk about some, I don't know if you guys, if you noticed it, but when I go back through on the snap counts, we noticed a couple of things. I'll start with the surprise. There were 4 players benched. Okay, there were 4 players benched that we would have expected to start. Now, when Elijah Wilkinson got hurt, we figured that would be Dennis Daly who would get the start, right? Seth, you and I both talked about that, and you were ready to move on to that. Wilkinson practiced on Wednesday. Thursday, he had a neck injury, and he didn't practice the rest of the week. He was ruled out. So we expect to see Dennis Daly, especially since now context would be this, is that prior to Daly coming back from injured reserve, Wilkinson was rotated. So Tristan Colon would come in and play a couple of series at left guard. When Daly came back, Daly was the one who played those 2 series. But Colon got the start. And when Gannon when he was asked about it on Monday, said that Colon started all week. That would mean he was starting. He was working with the starting offense on Wednesday before Wilkinson. So Wilkinson was benched. That probably was a long time coming. It was just a matter of when. That was a matter of when. Keontae Ingram, who was the starter in place of James Conner against the Rams, guess what? Did not play a single offensive snap against the Seahawks. Benched. Kayvon Wallace, who had played every snap of weeks 2 through 6. Benched. Completely, it was absolutely a surprise. Now, Keitrell Clark also did not get in the game at all, and with Antonio Hamilton out, we kind of think, because we did see Hamilton pass Clark on the depth chart in terms of playing. We saw that happen a couple weeks ago. It happened against Cincinnati. It was Hamilton playing and not Keitrell. But when Jalen Thompson got hurt, that necessitated, because Hamilton was slide inside of the slot, it necessitated Clark playing. He didn't play, and it was Starling Thomas who got every snap playing boundary cornerback. And so it was a combination of Elijah Wilkinson and Dennis Daly getting demoted, Keontae Ingram getting demoted for Emari Demercado. You have Keitrell Clark getting benched, and then Kayvon Wallace getting benched. I think the one that raises the eyebrows the least is the Keontae Ingram thing, because we know that the Cardinals are trying to throw crap at the wall to see what sticks when it comes to the run game. And Demercado is steady, and while Gannon did praise Ingram, like what they have, we've seen it on the field. I think he's had 2 good runs this year, and a whole bunch of negative runs, and that's not, like, you can't have negative runs. Like, you need to gain 1 to 2 yards even on your bad runs.
No, and that's, again, where the questions came in, and you wondered how much longer this could keep going. Ingram, on the Ingram side of things, he's looked kind of lost. I don't, he runs really hard into people. Like,
yeah, that's, well, and it feels like the first few times I'm like, man, he's so unlucky. I'm like, when he's in the game, there's guys in the backfield, and that's been the case. I'm like, but why? What does the offensive line not know how to block for Ingram?
Right.
It's odd. But so DeMarcado I wasn't surprised by it, but I found it interesting that Cologne started not only in place of Wilkinson, but in place of Daly as well.
Yeah. Do you think that's just Daly just getting activated off the IR and Cologne's been there the whole time? Like I'm trying to figure it out. It's, we've said all along, this is a situation where this group specifically is really looking for guys that buy in. And this isn't any insight or anything like that, but it just seems like a little, it just seems like they make decisions sometimes that are based on that, more than maybe
like it's less than a football decision, but it might be simply because I'm sure like it's not like Wilkinson is good enough to play him, even if you're not convinced he's totally bought in, right? Like there's a talent level that comes with this. This is different than like cutting DeAndre Hopkins, who's clearly a talented player, and you're like you're just eating that, and that's for the sake of that. And there were roster moves this week, so we've now had 4 confirmed benchings. The Kayvon Wallace one for me was interesting because like, would you say this that there's no real doubt that he is a better defensive back than Andre Sacheret?
Yeah, and so that's the thing. There's got to be more to the story.
Because the other thing that happened on Tuesday, Wallace was outright cut after he was benched. So he went from playing every snap defensively to playing no defensive snaps and 2 days later off the team. And this is a guy who was with Jonathan Gannon and Nick Rallis in Philadelphia. It's a guy they already had a relationship with. So you feel like there's a story there that hasn't been touched on.
Yeah, and I wonder if we'll get the story.
Probably not. The Cardinals are no good about that. We might get it on a cryptic Instagram post later on.
Right, exactly.
But it feels like Gannon has, I think, publicly been fairly one patient but two competitive, and I think we reached the point of the season with these 4 straight losses that they're shaking things up. They're saying, okay, we're not wrestling. Kayvon, who's done like we're gonna go with Sacheret. Now, granted, Budda Baker's back, but Kayvon was their number 1 non-Jalen Thompson Budda Baker safety since week 1. Keitrell got all the love during training camp of the preseason. The eyeball said he played pretty all right to start the season, but he's clearly found himself in the doghouse. That he needs to do things, and there's been the suggestion from Gannon, not saying it explicitly, he needs to practice better. Maybe whether he likes the mentality he has, but maybe he's not quite. Maybe it got to his head a little bit starting that early, and he's not as dialed in or as locked in as he should be. But Gannon wasn't afraid to move off of him. They cut their punter, and that ended up affecting a field goal because Gillikin did not get the laces around, and you could tell Prater was so angry after the missed kick.
Yeah, that was bad.
He was so mad after that missed kick. But then, the DeMarcado thing, they're just let's ride the hot hand, and DeMarcado was playing all right. But the fact that Ingram had no snaps at all meant they decided that was an Amari game. And then the offensive line, nothing surprising there. But I think we're reaching the point in the season where they will shake things up just to keep people on their toes so that even though they're going to lose games, so that they don't go into games expecting to lose.
No, and it's just one of those situations that you have to wonder what the overall mentality is right now, because like you said, Kayvon Wallace wasn't just like another player. Like, he had been kind of one of the dudes on this team. And for him to basically, like you say, not just get benched, but then obviously cut, it's a really interesting way for them to, I don't even know.
Now, numbers-wise in the safety room, they had too many safeties on the roster. With bringing back Buddha, they had 6 safeties on the roster. But, why in the world would you not cut Quantrez Knight, who no one's heard of, and he hasn't done anything?
Well, and you look at it, 2 weeks ago, he played 82 snaps against the Bengals. Last week, he played 57 snaps against the Rams. So it's not like he was a guy that was like just getting by. He had the 3rd most snaps on this roster.
Right? Like, he played every defensive snaps from weeks 2 to the week 6. In week 1, Buddha and Jalen Thompson were both healthy, but he was playing the role that Isaiah Simmons was going to play. And so it was a significant amount because, when you had, he was essentially their nickel back. Only Jalen was, Thompson was sliding over to the slot, but Kayvon was their nickelback, went to starting safety and played every snap for 5 weeks, and then absolutely nothing. It wasn't just, okay, they're working in Sasha, they're splitting time. It went from he was playing all the snaps to you're done. You're done.
Yeah.
And then 2 days later,
So
you're not only done, but you're gone.
Yeah, but it was also like, that's the thing, is it's crazy to think that it was just so quick. Like, it kind of, like we said, there's got to be something behind the scenes that we will eventually not find out about. But to play 100% of the snaps last week to being benched and cut, even if your room is full, like that, it's kind of.
Quantrez Wright is a perfect guy to cut. Nobody knows who he is. He hasn't done anything. It's like Joey Blunt, who's been a stud on special teams. Okay, you don't cut him. That's fine. But yeah, the Wallace move is real interesting. And now we also have another injury to deal with. And luckily, this is a room that is actually deep. Zach Ertz suffered a calf strain. He's on injured reserve. That was announced on Tuesday. First reported that it was going to happen. The team announced it on Tuesday. And so now we're going to get a really healthy dose of Trey McBride. I think this is, quietly.
Yeah, you never want to say it's a good thing. Like, injuries are never good, especially a guy that's had such a great career.
He has. But I think we are seeing the end of Zach Ertz in Arizona. I think.
Yeah.
I think he'll still come back, and because Kyler likes him. But the TV broadcast made it sound like that the coaching staff is trying to find ways to add to McBride's role. And that was weird because he had a couple of weeks where he was getting less playing time than Jeff Swaim. But maybe he's turned a corner right now, and so we're going to see a lot of Trey McBride. We're going to see a lot of Jeff Swaim. And now they have 2 rookie tight ends on the roster because Elijah Higgins was active for the first time. Now, he was a 6th-round pick this year. He was active for the first time, played on special teams, played a few snaps on offense, even caught his first pass, even though it didn't gain any yards. And then they just signed Blake Whiteheart, the kid who initially made the roster as an undrafted rookie out of Wake Forest. So now they've got Higgins and Whiteheart on the roster. It looks like they're pushing towards the youth. And though Ertz the plan is to bring Ertz back. And that might be right about the time. Kyler will be back. That's the other thing that we know. It was reported that he's going to come. They're basically going to use the entire 3-week window. So that means starting him on the road against the Browns, or if they want to use the whole 3 weeks and activate him on the Tuesday after that, then he would get his first start against the Falcons. So we know that he's not going to play against. So when they started the clock, we know, okay, probably not Seattle. Now we know it's not going to be the Ravens, so maybe the Browns, and if not, then definitely the Falcons. So we know he's coming back. Getting Zach Ertz back for the stretch run, I think, will be good for Kyler because he likes throwing the ball to Ertz. But at least in this case, it's an injury at a position where they actually have quality depth. You've got McBride, the young up-and-coming tight end, and Jeff Swaim, you're not going to get excited about a Jeff Swaim on your team, but he's a very good pro. Very good.
Well, he's not just a good pro. He's an absolutely necessary piece to almost every roster. Like, you have to have a veteran.
A good veteran blocking tight end who can catch a few passes.
Right, and that's Jeff Swaim, and he's done a nice job, like you said, and they brought back which guy today?
Blake Whiteheart.
Yeah, Whiteheart, who we thought, I think you and I both picked him to make the roster.
He did make the roster until they claimed Higgins.
Right.
So clearly Higgins was on their radar, and so now we get to see, because Whiteheart probably won't be active on game days. This was the first time this last weekend where they had 4 tight ends active, and I think that was simply a problem. That's because Zach Pascal was out, and so I believe Higgins played.
And they saw the future.
Yes, I think they saw. I think what it was is that they had 4 tight ends active because they only had 5 receivers active, and basically Zach Pascal's special team snaps went to Higgins. I would have to guess, because Pascal was normally getting about 10 snaps a game on offense if there wasn't someone banged up, and Higgins got 6. So basically, he was playing big wide receiver, and that's the kind of tight end that Higgins is, right? He's basically a big, fast wide receiver.
He's kind of an H-back type of guy.
So I'll expect to see. We'll see if Whiteheart is actually active for game days.
And it's a ton of snaps they're losing, though. I mean, Ertz has played 64% of the snaps this year. That's a ton. So, like, this is going to be an interesting thing to kind of watch unfold just because of that. I mean, his snap count with Arizona has far exceeded, I think, even what he was doing in Philly kind of at the end when he was playing 61% of the snaps, and then he came to Arizona, played 81%, 79%, and then this year was a career low since his first 2 years in the NFL at 64%, but that was still more than what he was doing in Philly 2 years ago when they traded him. So, like, I feel like part of this is on Ertz. I never blame a guy for wanting to come back from an injury, but a 33-year-old that his game is athleticism, coming off an ACL, probably just wasn't in the best shape. And I'm glad it's not a serious injury. I'm glad it's nothing that he's got to have surgery or anything like that. But he probably just was a little gung-ho about this, right? Like, he probably and then it's on the Cardinals too. And I get the fact that, like, hey, if a guy's going to be out here, he's got to be out here. Like, that's on him. Like, he if he can't go, he can't go. But if he's out there, we got to play him. And so I'm a little. It's just disappointing because you look at a guy that's a 3-time Pro Bowler, that's been a very good to great tight end in the league for over a decade. I mean, a 12-year NFL career or 11-year NFL career, is absurd. And at least he's won a Super Bowl. He's done everything. He's playing well. So that's good to see.
But yeah, that's more changes coming. I didn't get a chance to look at what the depth chart now looks like, if there's any changes, but that's coming up actually after the show. We'll write up a last couple of things to publish at night so people can read them in the morning. But with that, we will end this edition of the Rise Up Seahawks podcast, the best of Cardinals talk on the web. That's Seth Cox. I'm Jess Root. We'll be back again in a couple of days to preview for our preview, picks, and props for Week 8 against the Ravens. Thanks for listening as always.
Thanks for listening to the latest edition of the Rise Up, See Red podcast. Listen to previous episodes and subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher Radio, Audioboom, or many other podcast platforms so shows are delivered directly to your mobile device. Please give the show a 5-star rating and always support the sponsors who support the show. We'll be back soon for the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Rise up, Red Sea, be Red, See Red, and of course, Rise Up, See Red.